thing, and I'm not seeing anything.
Yeah, it should be black screen.
Okay, fair enough.
And then I'm gonna refresh this and refresh this. Just want to make sure they're live. Okay, this is not.
See, now I need a Partagas number 7. I'm looking over. I haven't had a good cigar in a while.
Okay, looks like YouTube is live.
Oh, I'd share one with you if I could.
All right, voices are coming through. So
I'm going to be in Denver next week, and I'm definitely going out with some writer friends, and we're going to go to find a cigar bar.
I'm getting the live feed on Facebook.
Okay.
I'm not monitoring. I should,
right.
just so I can see what the heck's going on.
All right, quiet on the set. We are going live here. And where are my notes? Okay, folks, we are live here. I'm just trying to grab my notes and I see where they are. And welcome to episode 2 of the Horror Lounge, the show in which the best horrorologists in town will discuss horror in depth and get a conversation going for a seasoned horror viewers, as well as helping introduce newbies to the horror genre. I am Rigor from Then Is Now podcast and the East Meets the West podcast.
And I am Bill Van Ryn from Fanzine Drive-In Asylum and Facebook page Groovy Doom and the weekly webcast, the Drive-In Asylum Double Feature.
Awesome. And like I said, this is our second episode, but it's our first live stream. We're targeting the first Sunday of each month at 8 p.m. EST for our regular live show, although that could change depending on our schedules. But Bill and I will be sure to let you guys know well in advance what the date will be. Generally, it should be on a Sunday at 8 p.m. We also have a special guest with us today, author and podcaster Scott, aka S.A. Bradley. We're so glad you could join us today, Scott.
Thanks so much for having me on. I look forward to seeing what the conversation is. I had a lot of fun on your show before and talking about horror. Yeah, I never really get bored by that.
Yeah. Before we get into things, first of all, Bill, is the live stream on Facebook going?
Yeah, it is. I think we're good.
All right, awesome. I had the wrong thing up. So I just want to say, poor Bill, I feel bad for you, but you deserve some praise for joining us tonight. Bill was up all night Friday and last night at the April Ghouls Drive-In Monsterama, which is held in Riverside at the Riverside Drive-In in Vandergrift, Pennsylvania. And it's run by our friends, George and Jean. How are you holding up, Bill? How was the Monsterama?
I'm doing great. I painted these eyeballs on my eyelids, so my eyes are actually closed right now. But we had a lot of fun. It's been going on for a while, since 2008, I think, was the very first one that they ever did. It's just such an exciting experience to get to attend something like that and sort of pretend that it's not 2022 anymore and that it's actually like 1978. And there are 4 fantastic films that you're going to get to watch that night. Food from the concession stand that's terrible for you, but so delicious. You get to sit in your car, you can smoke, you can drink, you can behave badly, but not too badly. And it's a lot of fun. I look forward to it. Twice a year they do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I've had George and Jean on Then Is Now podcast several times. I feel bad I couldn't get there this year, but I did go last year. It was so much fun. I was there in spirit, though, because I did watch Zombie 3. And then when the wife got home from work, she watched Terror Train with me, which she had never seen. And those are both just fun movies. I had forgotten both of them. So it was almost like watching them for the first time. I still have to see Well, the movies, like you said, you mentioned off camera, you had was it, Halloween 2, Terror Train, Effects, not FX with Brian Brown, but EFFECTS
Right.
from 1980, I think.
1980 is when it actually first played anywhere. I think 79 it played in Pittsburgh, like December 1979. It only had a couple of dates at a local theater here in Pittsburgh called the King's Court, because of course it was made here in Pittsburgh by associates of George Romero's. Dusty Nelson is the director, and a lot of other people are in it. Tom Savini's in it. Joe Pilato is in it. A fantastic role for Joe Pilato.
Nice.
He sort of like shreds the scenery in Day of the Dead, so you might question whether he was a great actor. He really was, because this role is very different for him. And
Awesome.
it's just a mind-blowing film. I can't recommend it enough. It looks like nothing. It's a really super low budget movie. And John Harrison, how could I not mention John Harrison?
Right.
Has a prominent role in it too. And I recommend it. Used to be streaming on Shudder, so if you have Shudder, I think you can still watch it. AGFA did a great Blu-ray. If not, you can see it.
I found it on YouTube also, so I'm good. That's on my list.
You also mentioned Midnight, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Another connection. Right?
Yeah, we had 2 Pittsburgh-based films in a row there. And I think it was definitely the first time Effects ever played at a drive-in, at least in Pittsburgh. The only other city that I can verify Effects played in was Tucson, Arizona. And it had like a really shaky distributor, and it sort of got buried. Aside from those screenings in Tucson, I don't think it played anywhere. It was never on VHS, never. The first time it debuted on home video was like 2005. Someone put out a DVD finally.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I misspoke there too. Effects is actually on Tubi, and Midnight's on YouTube. But then on this last night, you had Evil Dead 2 Reanimator, both classics, as well as Dr. Butcher MD, which can also be found as under Zombie Holocaust. That's on Prime, and but you have to pay for it, so I'm holding off on that. And then, the last one was Zombie 3. That was also on Tubi, so I was glad I got to see that one.
Zombie 3, of all movies to be there in spirit for, what made you pick Zombie 3?
It's just, I don't know. I remembered enjoying it. I just didn't remember much about it, so I picked that one, and I had a blast. I loved it.
I left, I have to confess. It was the last movie on Saturday. I was really wiped out, and I was like, do I think I can make it through Zombie 3? No, I don't think I can. But I'm glad you like it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. All right, now, folks, feel free to comment or ask questions on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll try to get to them as best we can. And don't forget, if you're watching on Facebook, please like the Fright Lounge page. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe and like the video, as well as hitting that little bell when you subscribe, so you get notifications for when we're putting new videos out. And our topic today is going to be somewhat broad. Now, Scott is the host of the Rondo Award-nominated Hellbent for Horror podcast, and he's written a book called Screaming for Pleasure: How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy. Scott, you were on Then Is Now podcast, and we talked about your book, but we wanted to go a little more in depth here regarding your philosophy about how horror can make people happy and healthy. And there are a lot of preconceived notions. I've said that a lot on the show lately, especially in the last episode, that preconceived notions that non-horror fans have about horror. So they shy away from it, yet they'll turn around and watch CSI or something that similar that has gruesome scenes in it. So perhaps you want to maybe get into it a little bit, tell the folks who haven't heard about your book what it's all about to start off with.
Sure. So Hellbent, or Screaming for Pleasure: How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy. It's a
regarding philosophy about how.
Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
That was my fault.
That was live. Hey, voices in my head all the time, so you never know. Occasionally, I want to see if anybody else responds. But it's a deep dive. My book is a deep dive into all things that are creepy and crawly. But what I want to do is show that horror can also be healing as well as fun. And what am I talking about with healing? Well, what I usually say is, it's not going to cure your lumbago, but and I'm not telling people, get off of your meds for depression and watch the Friday the 13th franchise, although it may not be the worst thing that could happen to you. But I'm really talking more about the little things that mean a lot. And so for me, I talk a lot about how horror just goes into this area almost like music does in our lives, which is you don't really analyze music while you're listening to it unless you're like really deep into it or you're a musician. Most of us feel the music first, whatever it is that is coming on. We feel that emotionally. And what it does is music often speaks to that thing that we can't articulate. And I believe that horror does the same thing. So when I talk about horror relieving some of our anxieties, I think about like, going to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist goes, well, what's wrong with you? And I'd be like, yeah, that's what's wrong with me. I have no clue. There's no word for it. And so horror allows us to take a look at these pieces of us that we don't even know that we might have an issue. And that's where that creative zeitgeist comes in with horror, where you see movies that suddenly become big hits because they speak right to the time. Like you can look at Get Out, where Get Out, nobody expected anything out of that. It's a February release movie. It wasn't going to be anything. And then boom, people saw it and it spoke directly to an audience that didn't feel it had any kind of representation at that time, or it just caught up on the mindset that was there. It's a tension that was in the background. And I think that horror does that a lot for us personally. That allows us to take a look at the parts of us that do get scared by certain things at a safe distance. I call horror movies kind of like our safe handshake with that shadow self, that Jungian side that is the part of us all of us have, that little animal inside that really wants to do nasty things. And it says it's okay to have that. In fact, if you listen to Jung, he says you better take a look at it every so often. Yeah, you can ignore that and pretend that everything's okay at your own peril. If you ignore it, you end up on TMZ and stuff like that because you go absolutely ballistic in public. And I think that it allows not only the individual to feel a little bit more attuned to that part to them of themselves, allow themselves to have a safe look at the things that they fear. All monsters are metaphors. So basically you can have a monster stand in for whatever the boogeyman is that's freaking you out at any time, but it's also fun. And it's a sense of play. And I think adults especially lose the ability to have avenues for a sense of play often. And there is something truly playful about the horror film, just like there is in comedy. And I also think you find community. So if you find a community of people who think just like you do, you're no longer beating yourself up over some of the dark thoughts that you have. You're able to take a look at the world in a way that is safe from a distance. I think you have a pretty good life. And so I think that horror does that. And I think if you look at what's funny is you're talking about the drive-in. I've done a couple shows about drive-ins. I've gone to the Mahoning drive-in, and I've gone to the Skyline drive-in in Indiana that do the same kind of thing, right? They have this ritual that goes on for 2 days of watching these iconic images that are from another time and allow us to laugh at it and also get freaked out if we want. And I think it's interesting that so many of these drive-ins, the ones that survive, realize that they can't just show the movies on film. They can't compete with the multiplexes. What they need to do is find a way to tap into the stuff that really excites us. And I think that the horror film is usually what you see. You may see sex comedies or something like that at drive-ins where they'll have marathon days, but you don't see too many like drama marathon days. You don't see much, maybe action films, maybe, but they'll probably be a little bit tinged with horror. You're going to maybe go to Hong Kong. It's going to be something that's going to be very genre specific and a little bit out there. And horror is always there. I say that horror takes takes the slings and arrows for everybody, and it's there when you need it anyway. You can beat it up, you can call it all sorts of names, you can denigrate it, but when the nation needs it, horror is there to release that pressure that we have.
There's a psychological term called eustress, which is, you know, a low level sort of trauma that you experience, like when you go on a roller coaster or watch a horror movie or something, and it's actually psychologically beneficial to the person, which is, you know, kind of what you were saying. It's interesting though that so many people are willing to do that, are willing to put themselves in a distressing situation, and not only do they enjoy it, it's become a ritual, like you said.
Well, I think it's by choice too. I mean, the thing that I always say is that the world itself is absolutely crazy, right? I have no control over the things which are very terrifying in this world. And when I was a kid, there were certain things that were terrifying. And as I've grown into an adult, there are other things that are terrifying. But I can watch a horror film and I have the choice of whether to go through it. I can pause it, I can turn it off, but there's something very rewarding about getting to that other side. And it's because I get to kind of unconsciously work on whatever it is that's driving me crazy in this world. That stuff might hurt me, but a horror movie will never hurt me. And I know that going in. A roller coaster, I know it's not going to hurt me, but I still wish to get that energy. Comedy and horror have kind of this weird connection. I don't want to say that they're very close, because say that to a stand-up comedian, they'll punch you right in the face. But the idea is that horror and comedy both work on the element of surprise, right? Comedy has you watching someone do something that you'd never do in a million years, but you're really intrigued by it. You know, Animal House, all of these movies, you're going to see someone do something that you shouldn't ever want to do, but you want to anyway. And then a horror movie, on the other hand, is watching someone endure something that you would never want to endure in a million years. And both of those things are somewhat cathartic. And, you know, sometimes people go, yeah, but what's it cathartic of? I'm like, name it. You know, why do I have to be the psychologist? I can tell you that what it does is it gives me an energy. And sometimes folks get that from music. They'll get it from a sporting event. You know, people who follow sporting events to a degree that is quite obsessive are getting something out of that more than just watching the box scores. And I think that there is something to be said about not just kind of escapism, but I think that it's I never like when it's just talked about as a roller coaster, right? Because it's like, it's kind of a cop out. The thing is, it would be like a roller coaster if everybody hated you for going on the roller coaster, or the roller coaster, you know, something terrible would happen in the middle of it and you endured that thing. I think that horror does. It's not all fun and games. I don't think it's supposed to be all fun and games. It can be fun and games. I find it enjoyable. But to me, horror movies have a certain purpose, right? If we're talking about what stories are here for, I think that horror has a very distinct thing as opposed to other pieces. It is talking to that dark part of us. It is the cautionary tale. When I talk about horror, I say that it is the second story ever told. First story, you know, around the campfire, first campfire with the first wise man and everybody's huddled. He's like sitting there. First story is thank you, spirits, and thank you, animals and food, for being here. Thank you for the warmth of this fire. We are all here together. We are family. We are protected as long as we're together. And the second story is don't go into the woods. Go into the woods, something terrible is going to happen to you. And so the cautionary tale is right there. And you learn a lot about your tribe by what that cautionary tale is. And so for me, the cautionary tale is kind of the moment where we realize that there are boundaries and we can get past some of these boundaries. And when we do, that's kind of the hero's journey. We go through that forest that Campbell talked about. Go in the forest, and all of a sudden the dog that's your companion is gone. All of a sudden you're like, oh, I must be at the place where I'm going to be challenged. And horror does that in its kind of simple way where you're not going to die, but it does want to take you into dark spots. Horror is, by its own need and necessity, why it is there, why it is necessary for us. It is there to challenge us and maybe offend us sometimes, maybe freak us out, maybe push us to our limits. It's not here to share half of its sandwich at lunch class with us. You know, it's not its point. There are other places you can go for that. You know, some people say, well, I like some horror movies as a comfort food. I'm like, well, go eat some soup. Horror should surprise you. Horror should shock you. That's the thing that I think is exciting and important about it. You can have fun with that, but it's not just fun. I think there's also this really cool thing that why I talk about it at the level of any other art form. I'm not saying, oh, it has to be superior, although I do think it's superior. I think that it deserves to be talked about at the same level as any other drama that's out there. I think it has a very specific need, and I think it is poetic. I think it allows for a lot of interpretation. It's made for metaphor and allegory and any kind of myth that you need. Horror is able to talk about those things. And instead of sitting there talking about a movie that's like movie of the week, where you get whatever the thing is that is the hot topic and you have some maudlin story about it, horror allows for symbolism to actually talk about that under the text. There's a lot of things that are in horror movies that talk about things that are happening in social anxieties that we've got in any decade. I might not sit for an ordinary people style movie about it, but Hereditary is kind of ordinary people with a severed head. And so, you've got this thing where you go into family drama, you can be engrossed by that. There's art there.
Right. And there was two things you mentioned that made me think of a couple things. One is you mentioned horror being cathartic. And the first movie that comes to mind, even though it's a thriller, that still falls under a subcategory of horror, the movie Vertigo, because I think that's cathartic for people that have vertigo. And then the other point I wanted to bring up was you mentioned the movie Get Out. And that's one of those films that I like to use as an example of, we watch Frankenstein or Dracula from 1931 today. Great movies, but they're not scary. However, when the time when they came out, audiences were terrified. I remember my grandfather telling me he was absolutely terrified when they first revealed the monster. So I think horror movies tend to speak to that generation. What makes society afraid at that moment?
Yeah, they lose a little in context as time goes on, because it's been it's like a joke, like Scott mentioned, that it's close to comedy. It's a joke's funny, and then and everybody starts telling it, then it's not quite so funny anymore. So you have to find a new joke.
Yeah. Well, and it's generational as well. I'm thinking about right now how on Twitter there was a whole kerfuffle about Steve Martin's King Tut. So Steve Martin was just on Saturday Night Live, as he is every decade since it started. And since he was on his King Tut from the 70s, his appearance singing that song in Outfit came back on and was rising in the Twitter files. And people who are of the newer generations, like, I don't get this at all. What was funny about this? What was in our parents' drinks that they thought that this was funny? What are you talking about? It
wasn't what they were drinking.
Right. Yeah. And I was like, it's not only that they were in an altered state, but it's also, there were only 3 stations. So everybody watched what was the funniest and most outrageous thing in 3 stations. It was that. And people were somewhat savvy at that time about the commercialism of the King Tut thing. But if you have to explain all that to a joke, it's dead. And so I say that about horror as well, because there are people my age that look like me that will sit there and go, the movies today suck. Kids these days don't understand films. They don't get The Exorcist. I'm like, well, I got to tell you, when I saw The Exorcist in the 70s, we were a less secular area of the world. The church owned a lot more real estate in reality. It certainly also was very much tied in with the powers of government. We were in the midst of having social uprest that was happening at campuses. We had feminism that was in the Equal Rights Amendment that was making people nervous about women, especially women who were divorced and living alone with their kid, and kids were starting to get really mouthy, right? So you have all of this happening, and The Exorcist is like this total scalding hot thing in the face. It was so riveting and so original at that time. But now the devil and everything like that is kind of a joke. The church has lost so much of its power. We are much more secular, and pacing has changed so much in films. You watch the beginning of The Exorcist, and you're spending an awful lot of time in Iraq, and then you're spending an awful lot of time watching an actress go through her movie thing before she goes home, and she sees her kid playing with a modeling clay and stuff. There's a good 20 minutes of exposition in that film before you really start chugging. When it does hit, it's like a freight train. But if the kids don't understand The Exorcist's importance without us having to explain all the reasons it was so cutting edge, it's not the kids' fault. That is time changing things. If, on the other hand, I refuse to like the new films because I just don't like the way that they are, that's on me. I'm not keeping up with how things are being socially relevant at this point. But I think you don't look to The Exorcist for what's really important. Go look at Beyond the Door and all the ripoffs. So I think, for me, if you're going to take a look at what was creeping anybody out in any decade, I tell people, look at the B movies. Look at the movies that were playing in drive-ins. Look at the movies that were second bills or that were in grindhouses, whatever it might be, because those people lived and died on making you either pissed off or so excited to see that you're going to put your money down and see it before it disappeared the next week. Those were the movies that were really talking about the button pushing things that were happening in the world. Everybody talks about it being socially irrelevant now and woke and everything. It's always been that way, but it's been that way in somewhat devious manners. I mean, if you go all the way back to silent films, that's in the silent film era, one of the biggest scary things that there was white slavery. There were a bunch of grindhouse movies about white women going to New York and getting sold into white slavery. Most of them, weirdly, those movies were like Dutch women or people from Sweden.
Yeah.
And so they'd have these movies, and there was no white slavery. It was a very big topic because there was a real hatred of foreigners. And where are most of the foreigners at that time? They're in the cities. So people who look like us are at risk. At least that's what was being said in those silent films. Then you have World War One. And then World War One, people come back maimed and destroyed. There was actually an act on the government books that people who were maimed, like were missing arms or parts of their face, weren't allowed to go out during the day because it would upset people in the area. So what do we have? We have The Man of a Thousand Faces. We have Lon Chaney doing movies where the villain has no arms. The villain has only one leg. He has a hump on his back. The idea of the maimed as a freak. That's another thing that you see as the tension of what's going on. In the 30s, all that craziness is going on in Europe. We're in the middle of a depression. All of a sudden, Frankenstein from Germany and Dracula from Transylvania, all of these, foreign forces coming in, and also just the idea of the aristocracy is breaking down. The idea that we're working in science in such a way. We have the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and we go from the golem, the clay golem, to the electric Frankenstein. Mary Shelley takes the golem and puts some science in it, and next thing you know, we've got God and monsters. And so every decade, if you look at it, in the 50s, you got giant ants right after the nuclear attack, right? So we dropped 2 bombs, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the next thing you know, in Nevada or in New Mexico, in the New Mexican desert, there's suddenly giant ants heading towards LA after nuclear stuff. And so all these horror movies after that, whether they had any science to them or whether they were even thinking on any high level of cultural thought, they're still talking about what's important in the day.
Right.
My friend always talks about how there was like a movie where there's naked radioactive rods laying on the ground. And he goes, quick, put them in a pail of water. So they put them in a pail of water, like that's going to take care of it. That's as much science as they knew in that movie. But the thing that I say is it could have been anything that they had to put in the water. But they put radioactive rods in there because at that moment, nothing was more frightening or more provocative or sexy, whatever it would be, than nuclear stuff at that point. And so you see that through all these decades. Horror has always been doing it. But really, if you look at the low down grimy movies, the basket cases and stuff like that, those are the movies like slashers. Slashers are a direct response to what was happening with feminism. The entire idea of how we go around the slasher film, and you look at where it goes from the very beginning, it's kind of punk rock and stuff. But once they start getting protested, they double down. And the entendre just goes right through the fucking ceiling.
Thanks, Siskel and Ebert.
Yeah, exactly. Them and a few other folks. Yeah. So I think that there's always this response to whatever it is that we're getting a lot of anxiety over. And I love to say, you know, the ones that really matter, it's not the prestige films that get the Oscars or nominations. It really is the down and dirty ones can't help but talk about what really ails Mr. and Mrs. America.
And I remember my parents when I was a kid and we'd go see like the Friday the 13th films and they'd be like, why is it always the girl at the end that ends up saving the day? Like, what? So what? As long as someone saved the day, who cares?
Well, because it worked once in a really successful movie. So they just stuck with that formula.
Yeah.
I think that's very true.
We've got a couple of questions here on YouTube.
Uh-oh.
Okay, I'm sorry, I can't see it from here. It says, "This is Chelsea. What are your thoughts on camp and how you think it came about as it's a strong theme in horror?"
Oh, camp. Well, camp's friggin' awesome. I think camp has been around for a long time. I mean, if you're looking for earlier than Douglas Sirk, I mean, you can find there's a level of camp in early silent films.
Does she mean camp as in irony, or does she mean summer camp?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm not sure.
She has two follow-up questions. I think they might be related. It says, I always think about Tennessee Williams movie adaptations, so revolutionary for film rules of stories that had themes of murder or cannibalism to make them more accessible to the public. And then she put, but it seems to have taken on a new life in horror. Oh, and then she wrote irony. So she means camp.
Okay. Irony. Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah. So, I mean, all the way back to some of the performances that you see in silent films, I think camp is starting to come up. I think camp really starts with Midsummer Night's Comedy. I mean, you're looking at Shakespeare. You know, you go all the way back there, and he's using Greek gods and goddesses to mock the British. About what was happening in his time in England. People forget that when Shakespeare was around, you really couldn't fuck with the Queen. You couldn't fuck with the king. Yeah. So all of a sudden it's like a Scottish play, or, oh, it's Julius Caesar. You know, well, we're really talking about Julius Caesar. We're talking about, Spain. You know, we're in Spain here. We're not talking about England. But he was always talking about England. And so if you look at Midsummer Night's Sex Comedy, there's all of this stuff that's in there that is mocking the upper class. And so I think at that point you have such an exaggeration that's happening. But if we're talking about what we normally think of as camp, I mean, Douglas Sirk movies, you know, anything that's overwrought, when you have this thing of what we want to do is take the energy and just up it so much. I think understanding that it is upped so much is part of what I think is the good irony of it. I'm a huge John Waters fan, and Waters will constantly talk about, Herschel Gordon Lewis and Ray Dennis Steckler and folks like that who were making movies as the Kuchar brothers, two twins that were making all their movies in an apartment with their mother's friends as secret agents. So they have
Andy Milligan.
Yeah, Andy Milligan, you know, making all of his movies in one house in Staten Island and the yard around it. And I mean, all these things have this great camp value because I think we understand the spirit of what the person's trying to do. We get the overwrought feeling, but I also think that we understand that even though it is somewhat lacking in certain spots, you know, low budget B movie things, we get the energy that's behind them. It's like the idea of turkeys. So why do we watch? You don't see people watching really bad dramas. They don't sit around and have jiggly parties or, you know, whatever movie is like the most boring fucking thing that's been out recently. They don't, and people don't sit around watching The English Patient, you know, on marathons. I don't hear about that. But I do, on the other hand, hear an awful lot of people watching Herschel Gordon Lewis films, movies like Blood Freak, you know, all sorts of strange drive-in films. And we're not mocking them per se. We're getting into what's going on. I see people still dressing like Willard, right? From the Ben movies and stuff. You see people dressed as these bizarre B movie characters that are highly overwrought and really out there. because I think we love the surprise that's in these movies. If there's nothing worse to me than a boring horror movie. That's a bad movie. Most other movies I can find some kind of nugget in. So when I'm watching movies like, I mean, obviously, Mommy Dearest is an obvious hit, but you watch something like that and it's so insanely over the top, you laugh out loud, and yet you can't take your eyes off of it, and you repeat what you've seen because
It's also very closely related to horror too, because
yes,
those scenes where she attacks
the strangling,
yeah,
oh,
and like when she comes in like the wire hanger rampage, and it's all like dark, and she's wearing like that kabuki mask.
yeah,
Thing. It's very closely related to horror, which is something that John Waters and Andy Milligan also understood.
oh yeah, and Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol's
Andy
bad.
Warhol, yeah.
The whole idea of throwing the baby out of the window and everything, and
I
not only
shouldn't laugh at that, but I did.
but you do, right? Because it's so horrible, but you also have seen it, so the setup. The setup is so there on the nose and so crazy. It's there. What is it? Wabi sabi. It's called the Japanese ideal that you can love something for its imperfections. In fact, honor it for its imperfections. And I think we do that with horror films and for camp, because it does something for us. And I like to think that it's like the thing that horror and comedy have in common is surprise, the element of surprise. If you surprise me, even with the weirdest of performances, I'm going to remember it, like Crispin Glover dancing in the Friday the 13th movie. Everybody knows that dance.
Right.
It's the worst dance. It's not the absolute worst dance, but it's one that you remember. Crispin Glover, a very smart actor, even though he might be insane, because he does that kind of thing in his movies that he's in, and he steals the show because you're shocked by what you see. It's an absolute surprise.
I can't believe his directors always let him get away with that stuff too. That's pretty amazing.
They must just laugh out loud. They must just be like, this this just brightens the scene. What can I say? I'd love to not have it there, but at the same point, it somehow works. And I think camp, it's gotten bigger. I think it used to be an outsider thing, just like horror is an outsider thing. People who got into camp, people who got into B movies, turkeys, whatever you want to call it, and low budget horror films, all felt kind of a connection to, I think, the redheaded stepchild, which is those kind of movies. They're not what the mainstream wants. They're not what people normally like. I think now, and I think John Waters would agree, camp has gotten eaten into the mainstream, and he even finds it hard to find a way to shock that makes any sense, because the idea has been kind of co-opted in let's be campy about everything, and I don't think just being inept is good camp. I think good camp has a lot of intelligence behind it, which is something that, I'll be quoting Waters all day now that we've talked about camp, but his thing
That's
is
okay.
Yeah, I love his thing is there's good bad taste and bad taste. And bad taste is really simple, just buckets of blood with no reason, right? Just shock value for no shock value. In fact, because you have no reference or context over what's happening, it's dull. But then there's something that is just really confusing, surprising, outrageous. That's the stuff that you remember. You remember Carol Baker. You remember actors and actresses. Oh my goodness, how come I can't think of her name right now? I remember her, Susan
Tyrell.
Yep. Right. You just have to say Susan, right? And it's going to be Susan Tyrell.
She's one of my patron saints. So
awesome. But yeah, I mean, that's why do we remember her? Why Brad Dourif is still working? Michael J. Pollard before he died. Right. These very strange actors that had this range that might be this big, but it was also super huge. It was just at a high volume. We could not get enough of those folks. And I think we recognize, water seeks its own level. I think a lot of us feel like outsiders that love this kind of movie style. We are fed by it. We feel seen. The odd duck, right? The person who wasn't taken to the prom, the person who everybody got in front of to get the milk at lunch, whatever it might be. Those little things. I think when you're not really in step with the mainstream, I think you find these movies as kind of familiars of their own, something that speaks directly to you. And I think we champion them because of that. And that's some of the imagination that I think really works. And camp and horror, yeah, you go just a little bit too far, it's camp, but if you pull it back a little bit, maybe it's still horror. And I think you see plenty of movies where it starts as horror and it turns into camp, or they've always been partially horror, partially camp, like Dead Alive, Brain Dead.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's a masterful. I mean, I'm not sure how much that's camp as it is just cult absurdity, but there's a certain campiness to the priest, and there's a certain campiness to the mother.
And the mother, yeah. I think it's pretty campy. I have a problem with the term "so bad it's good." And and you mentioned turkeys, Scott, like that the Golden Turkey Awards, the Medveds and everything.
Fuck the Medveds.
Thank you. I knew we were kindred spirits. This was a big deal to me because those were always the movies, like you said, I identified with the offbeat stuff. And it was a little unnerving to hear people call these movies trash, because I found a lot of value in them, even though they weren't technically the most well-made films. No one could really understand why I was watching these movies. And I think a movie is bad when it's boring.
Yeah.
If there's nothing keeping you watching it, like, terrible movies like, It's Pat. Nobody's right. Probably going to be watching that movie. And if it's really bad, you don't even watch it again, and you never talk about it. Like, there's nothing to say about it because it was just a bad movie. But even though it was rickety and the dialogue was over the top and campy and everything, like, we're still watching Mana's Hands of Fate.
Yes.
Stuff like that. It's always going to be there. It's always going to find a new audience.
A lot of those movies.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, all right. I was going to say, I find that, and I've tried to explain this to people who say, well, how can you watch that movie? It's so bad. And it's like, I find that there's a genuineness on the part of the filmmaker and the actors on the older B movies, because they weren't setting out to purposely make a rotten film. They were trying their best to do it. Nowadays, you have a lot of companies that make these movies that are awful on purpose. And it's like
sci-fi.
A lot of and I hate to disparage the direct to sci-fi movies because there are some hidden gems there, but a lot of them I find it so difficult to watch because they're purposely made to be bad. Whereas in the past, these people were really trying to make something. The director had a vision, or the writer had a vision, and it just didn't quite come together, whether it was budget, acting, skills, whatever,
Yeah, that's something that I really talk about a lot too. It's like, I'm glad you mentioned the thing on Turkey. Me using Turkey, and it's not just me. I know a lot of horror fans and some diehard horror fans that are writing for magazines and stuff. We use the term Turkey to take it back. It's ours.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's like fuck you, and calling it Turkey is a bad thing. But I think what you said about the sci-fi movies and stuff, there is a difference. I call those sidewalk Rolexes. Now, I'm writing a chapter about that in my book, because sidewalk Rolexes are like, well, it kind of looks like it. It's enough to pass, but you get it for a couple of days and then it falls apart. It's really cheaply made, and it's not made with anything except trying to ape something else that is much, much better. And to me, the old B movies are much, much better than the sci-fi ones, because you're coming from a place of cynicism in making these new ones. It's basically, it's Hot Topic, right? It's the Hot Topic store for science fiction and horror. It's not really punk, but you can buy punk as long as it's made in China. It's that kind of weirdness. It's commercializing and commodifying something that happens like lightning in a bottle. Right. Nobody could, like, even Texas Chainsaw, the original Texas Chainsaw. I loved, I think it was Chaz Ballin said, some movies just happen. Ask Tobe Hooper. Like, in other words, that's a movie that almost makes itself. It gets out of its own control and becomes a strange piece of art that can't really be done again. And people have been making the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in a million different ways, let alone using the title, but just different styles of movies that are like that borrow so much from it. And they never get that madness again, because it's lightning in a bottle. And I think that that's the thing with these weird movies. You may not want the lightning that Beyond the Door 3 gives you, but at the same point, it is still lightning. And when I make jokes of these movies, it's not and I know there's a very fine line, right? And it's one of those things, a lot of us horror fans who say turkeys and we watch these movies, we get together to watch them and we laugh our asses off while we're watching them. It may seem like we're mocking them, but we are not going the Medved way. We're not ridiculing these things. We're with them. It's like making fun of your friends, when you're out somewhere and you're jabbing them a little bit. We get that it was a movie that just went off kilter a little bit, but that's so fascinating. It's like, once again, John Waters, give me an ugly face, give me a face with scars. A model face is dime a dozen. Give me a face that I can't forget. Give me Edith Massey. You don't forget Edith Massey when you see it. And I think that that's one of the reasons that horror movies, especially the B movies, have so much kick to them, because we can almost not believe what we're seeing. And there's also this thing, I think, where, like punk rock, it's very DIY. There's something exceedingly DIY about independent, low-budget horror filmmaking. It can be done just about by everybody. And when you watch some of these old movies, you go, if I had 3 more talented friends, I could make that movie. If I could find the backing of 5 dentists, I can make that movie. And so there's something attainable to that. It's almost like, Jesus walking on water. I can't attain that, but I might be able to be Father Guido Sarducci. I can make silly jokes and still, make people happy. I think that there's something to the idea that when we were watching these things as fans, and the people that I tend to call my people are the ones who can't just watch. We're not watchers. We watch it, but we know that the thing that's great is to give it back in some way. We're not hoarders. We are compelled to create in whatever fashion that is, whether it be that we sit and we write, we make a film ourselves, we make T-shirts, that have to be off the market in 24 hours, whatever it might be. It's the idea that you're expressing yourself because you are so in love with this thing. And it's hit because of that DIY attitude. You got all of punk rock comes from 2 or 3 bands that when everybody heard them the first time, they're like, they suck. And then they came to see them the next night because they're like, I can't believe what I just saw. Every one of the band members was playing a different song when they went 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then they got into a fist fight. They got 2 songs out. I'm going back tomorrow. I can't believe what I saw. That's so much more alive, right? Than sitting there and watching something that is a prestige film by a prestige director about a prestige topic that's for our times. And here are the golden arches that say that it's a wonderful film. And here's the awards that we're going to talk about in 5 months because of this film. That has a certain allure. But I think there's something really amazing about the horror movie, that DIY punk feel, like a dog on the playground, right? You're in elementary school and you look out, there's a dog in the playground. Well, forget about any kind of schoolwork. You're watching the dog, you're going crazy. Anarchy takes over. And I think horror has that kind of appeal. And I think we want to create as well. And we're really close to the creators. I mentioned Ted B. Michaels before the show. And that's a guy that you could call. He was in the book. If you wanted, you could call him and say, Ted, really love your movies. Thank you so much, brother. Something like that would be said. These folks were somewhat accessible, and yet they're still creating something that is art in the eyes of people. And, that's the difference between the big stage show of Led Zeppelin, which I'd have loved to see. But at the same point, there's something about this. There's barely a stage at some of the clubs that punk rock was playing. You could you watch the guy moving his own instruments, and he needed a place to crash after the show. I mean, you're part of it. You are in that DNA. And I think horror fans are kind of in the DNA of the movies that they watch.
Well, and like Bill, you asked me earlier why I chose Zombie 3 to watch. And I just remember last night I watched it by myself. And as my son, who co-hosted with us on the first episode, Spency, he said it on that show. He's like, Pop, you jump at movies that you know you're going to jump at. I still, as an adult, I get scared. So I'm on the couch with the blanket up to my face, terrified by what was going on. I didn't really see it as a quote unquote bad movie. It was definitely low budget, and there were moments where I was yelling at the characters on the screen, and I'm like, "No, why don't you do this?" A bunch of militia guys come in with the gas masks and the
Right.
hazmat suits on, and they're shooting them. The good guys manage to kill them all, and they take one gun. I'm like, "Take the bullets, take the magazines with you. Why aren't you doing that?" But at the same time, it didn't ruin the movie for me, or I didn't not like the movie because of it. I was engaged, like you said, from beginning to end. I was there. I was with those characters. They'd kill a character that I liked, and I was like bummed. So I definitely, there's an engagement there with these movies.
I absolutely loved. I saw, because I'm from Pennsylvania as well, but I was on the other side. I was in northeastern Pennsylvania, and they used to show the Rocky Horror Picture Show and Dawn of the Dead at the midnight shows. And there was either going on Cinema 1 or Cinema 2 at the Wyoming Valley Mall. And Cinema 1, you knew because they were all in S&M gear. And then on the other side, everybody's just like wearing rock shirts. But I remember going in, you're in an empty mall at midnight, sitting there with the gates down on all the different things, and you're watching Dawn of the Dead. So it was like this super meta thing. And the first time I saw it with a friend. It's over 2.5 hours at that point, and we're watching it, we're laughing, and then we're completely engrossed. And it was like total anarchy, down to a zombie pie fight, how Marx Brothers can get at certain points. I mean, there's so much anarchic stuff going on while the world's dying. Right? That's the thing. It's a fun movie, but it's also this chaos that is, we laugh while the world is spinning into this entropy soup with all these dying people and the zombies coming back. And I went to see that for an entire summer. We would get new friends and we would go there and we'd sit and watch this thing laughing. It was so much fun. But every time Flyboy dies, it really hurt. Every time Flyboy gets bit, it's like,
Yeah.
Now, and I think everybody kind of felt a little bit more like Flyboy than anything, because he's kind of in control. He's kind of cool. They have some of the funniest lines and all of that. But when he gets bit, I watch it now. I've got so many damn versions of that film. That, The Thing, and a couple others. I've got way too many versions. Texas Chainsaw, everything that's been on. I think I own. Watching it still affects me, even though I've seen it a whole bunch of times. It reminds me of exactly where I was at that moment, which is a level of nostalgia. But there's also just the idea of how involved you get with that storytelling at that moment. There's something great about being a masterful director to allow comedy and horror to have equal billing and respect. And I think that's the thing that a lot of horror comedies miss. They're kind of making fun out of horror through the comedy, whereas I think the really good ones don't do that. I think they find the situation funny, but they also find the horror brutal or
we just
scary.
recently talked about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein on Then Is
Yeah.
Now, and that's a perfect example of a perfect horror comedy.
Yeah. It's scary. Some of the scariest things that Frankenstein ever does in a film is in that movie. That's some of the most brutal Frankenstein stuff that there is. And Abbott and Costello are great. They take everything seriously about the monsters. The joke is Lou Costello, right?
Right.
Lou Costello.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember. Bud's the tall one. Yeah.
Bud
So, and I think that's great. The thing that I think of is American Werewolf in London, that they're very close cousins, because there's that same kind of thing to the two characters in the beginning that are walking across the moors before the attack. And it's very comedic about their situation. And when you go into the oh my God, I'm forgetting the name of the Boar's Head. No,
Boar's Head.
Yeah, Boar's Head. Yeah. Going to the Boar's Head, there's the humor of how the locals are treating them and stuff like that. But it's very much like something that you would see in Abbott and Costello. And then comes the violence. And then at that point, it turns into a different type of film. I think that movie is one of those that really gets it right. I mean, Shaun of the Dead gets it right. Shaun of the Dead has that wonderful thing, even though it's more that dry British humor, which I think is really towards the absurd more than anything else. I still think that it respects the horror when it decides to go in that direction, and it's not mocking horror fans. I think that that's another thing that happens a lot. Like when you mention thrillers, people who want to watch thrillers, they'll watch CSI. I don't think they hate horror. I think they hate horror fans. I think they don't want to be associated with that kind of thing, right? You know, we're like pro wrestling or something like that, where it's like, oh well, geez, you know, it's a little childish that you would be so into Freddy Krueger or whatever. And I'm like, well, have you ever thought about what Freddy Krueger is? You think about how intriguing the entire storyline is. You know, the first one. Let's go to the first movie and let's talk about that. But I think that, you know, there's that unseemly thing that was in the intelligentsia for the longest time, and I think that comes from the weirdest thing is we talked about Warhol before, and Warhol kind of rips a hole into what was the modernism movement, right? Where everything had to be of a certain style and type. And then you had these folks come in from Britain and Warhol that painting cans of soup and saying art itself can come from anywhere and it can be done by anybody. There isn't any hierarchy, and you don't have to have Rembrandt's approval to be able to do this. You certainly don't need the Upper West Side approval. Art can come from anywhere. Art can come from the gutter. And that changed a lot of things. And at that point, I think pop art starts to take away that high art snobbery. But then it gets kind of co-opted. And I think that happens in film quite a bit, where we have Andrew Sarris, Pauline Kael, Siskel and Ebert, as we're talking about before, that old guard that talked about the auteur theory, but only put the auteur theory to certain films. And they only put that to dramas. And basically, those folks always looked down at horror. They never saw horror as something that was legitimate. They put a line there. The genre name was there. And sometimes genre, the label, I think, is a really bad thing. Unless it's poison, we really don't need labels. Labels are something that is exclusive. It does not include. And I think that when we had this spate of critics all the way through the 80s, the 90s, and into the 2000s, they really promoted, including the artists themselves, the directors themselves. I mean, Friedkin went back and forth talking about whether it was a horror movie, The Exorcist. All these movies changed their genres when they got nominated for Oscars. They suddenly went from horror movies to thrillers. All of that happened because we had this separation. But I think now that Pauline Kael and all those folks have died, and I think the critic is no longer considered the seer and the keeper of the gates. I think, especially when you have something like Star Wars and onward, when you have the blockbusters, when you have movies like the Marvel Creative Universe out there, and that is being talked about at the same level of reverence like the Godfather films, I think that the separation between high art and pop art is gone. And that has actually helped horror get a little bit more, you know, of a respectable look. But I don't know if horror ever should. I don't think horror should ever be respectable. No. I think horror wears it nicely. In my new book, I'm saying, you know, in the first book, I talked about why horror does not deserve your shame. Right? It deserves to be put up there with any of the art things. But now that we've won a few Oscars, it's like, thanks, we don't need to be in your club. In fact, your club kind of sucks. Last time we saw your club, they were like slapping each other on stage. I mean, what is this? Right. You know, it started as a trade show. Let it go back to being a trade show. You know, the Oscars used to be something that you saw on a newsreel before the movie that you came to see that wasn't nominated. It was an in-group thing, a bunch of people applauding each other and patting themselves on the back, and it wasn't big.
The hierarchy, like you said, it was like the hierarchy. But now it's interesting because you mentioned critics as a hierarchy too, as being like the guard. And now everybody's a critic. Because now
Yes.
we have the internet. I mean,
Mhm.
myself included, I'm one of those people that came along and started talking about movies online. And I mean, I'm nobody. I'm never going to say that I'm on the level
Now.
as well, you know.
I don't
Well,
talk to nobodies. What's going on here?
but I never worked for the Chicago Sun-Times or the
Right.
Chicago Tribune, and I
Right.
never got anybody's permission to start doing this. I just started doing it, and that's the same thing with people who are making films now. Like people are making films for less money than ever, and everyone has a camera in their pocket. You can make a movie
Right.
with that
Yeah.
camera in your pocket, and people are doing it. So everybody sort of has their take on it.
Yeah.
Go
And I
ahead.
don't want to sound like too vainglorious, but I think that's why we're important, right? I think
Yeah.
our voices are important because everybody has a movie camera in their pocket, right? Then why are we seeing so many of the same type of films? And I think what we need to do is say, hey, it can be really original. Look at the camp from this time. Look at the stuff that was here. Why are these movies so great that you remember? Because they were surprising, because they were insane. I forget what you had mentioned early on in this conversation, but it was something about how the movies all kind of looked the same. And I remember watching the new Texas Chainsaw that was on Netflix, and there's this sequence where there's one of the characters has an engagement ring. He's holding on to it. We see it several times, and it's this little foreshadowing. And then he's killed, and then we see the ring on the ground, and I'm like, I've seen this before. I've seen this before in films. The same exact setup. It's like this forced tragedy thing. It's like throwing a cat at the screen. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how did we come up with like 3 volcano movies the same year? Because everybody's cheating off the same homework. The thing that's going to be interesting is having people realize that you don't have to look like the last thing. Just because you have a camera in your pocket doesn't mean that you have to make another found footage film that feels exactly like the last found footage film. You can
Right.
do something really strange. I mean, Ted V. Michaels and guys like that were like Ray Dennis Steckler, basically close-ups of electric toys, using that kind of thing in their movies as cutaways. And we're still not everybody's going to revere it, but we're still revering these movies long after some of these folks are gone.
Right.
You know,
We're still
and
talking about them at least.
yeah, we're still talking about them. And sometimes I love horror fans who are kind of like the old metal fans, which is like, you want to talk about the Scorpions of Black Sabbath? Screw that. Here's this band that came from Spain. They had 3 songs before they died in a car crash. Here's the bootleg. It's like, wow, you've got sacred. Yeah, wow. You always want to find the thing that's out there that's so bizarre, so strange to share with somebody. There's cachet in that, sure, but it's also the idea of what jazzes you, what really excites you. And I think if we can find what excites us and we decide to make that into a creative enterprise in film or books, whatever it might be, we're going to find something that's original, that is worthy of being copied by everybody, right?
Right. So
We have a
I just want to.
question.
Oh, go ahead.
We have a question in our Facebook chat.
That's what I was going to say.
Dustin and Mandy Fallon. Oh, is that what you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to ask you to read them.
Dustin and Mandy Fallon are watching. Dustin has a website called Horror and Sons. He's on the Drive-In Asylum double feature
Cool.
occasionally. He says, would you say that by being able to laugh at awful situations or these other macabre things, horror tends to be more optimistic?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if optimistic's the right word. That very well might be, but I do think that, and I found this from some of my friends, that some of us were really okay with some of the pandemic, like making it through the pandemic. Because it's like, yeah, I felt this way before. Sometimes waking up on a Tuesday feels like the pandemic, but I was doing that all the way back in 2000. We are kind of already looking at the thing that many people whistle in the dark about. So when I'm looking at the horror movies, I am kind of looking at the darker side, especially if you're looking at anything after Night of the Living Dead, right? I mean, Night of the Living Dead is the first horror movie that upsets the apple cart. Everybody upset it before, but everybody put the apples back up, except for George Romero. He just let us sit there with a disturbing ending. and that disturbing ending resonates with us. And we've had that kind of mood and feel in horror films. I think we're not just fascinated with the darkness, but we're attuned to it. We're aware of it a little bit more. We understand that the world doesn't always work out the way that we think it's going to. We get that things entropy is imbued in everything, and I think we find a beauty in that. I think that horror is beautiful in many ways. There's an elegance to the way that death happens. Sometimes there's a sense of awe. The true meaning of the word awe is a certain terror, that the idea that you have no control over yourself anymore. It's what's his name, Harry Dean Stanton dying in Alien. He turns around, he just goes and just stares with his jaw dropped as he's looking at this huge xenomorph. We understand awe. We've been in horror in certain ways. And I think that we're more ready for the challenges and the horrible things that happen in life, and be a little bit more like that Irish version of optimism, which is, yeah, things kind of suck, but we can laugh through it and we'll endure. I think we have that kind of thing, that it would be the form of optimism that I would say for the horror fan. We don't shy away from the darkness. We were a little bit readier for, say, the pandemic than the people who tell you to pick yourself up by your bootstraps. What if the bootstraps of the entire planet? How are you going to pick yourself up from that? Everybody was sent to their rooms. And now what do you do? So, one more encouraging meme of a cat going, hang in there, isn't going to fucking do it. But I think we were kind of ready for the darkness to be there. It didn't make it any more pleasant, but I think we weather those storms a little bit better. I think it's also kind of compared to, I like to say that a lot of horror fans had a really bad first act in their life, but they're having a fantastic second life. The second act is fantastic. We've made it through whatever it was that was so painful when we were kids or when we were adults. Whatever it was, we found our way through that through expressiveness of some sort. Rock, music, art, movies. We found something that helped us get through those things, and we are survivor happy. We've been able to handle being the outsiders. We've been able to deal with that and navigate it and make it into something that is usable. And so that is an optimism that I think we do have as horror fans and watching horror.
Well, and I'll say this about the pandemic too, was that I started my podcast in 2016. Actually, I had two of them. And it just, because of work and life and just for whatever reason, I was only able to get a handful of episodes out. The pandemic hit. And first of all, my wife was like, was this like a horror movie? You should be in your element. And I was like, well, yeah. And then I was
Two
like,
on the nose.
yeah. And now I have the free time to do it. And I was able to dive in full time, at least for almost 2 years. And now here we are. I'm almost at episode 100 on Then Is Now. And, now we've got this show. So I've been able to not only crank it out, back to work again, but able to juggle it now. And I've finally got the ball rolling. And for me, the pandemic, I knew it was horrible for a lot of people, but for me personally, it was actually a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying we should have pandemics. A lot of people were,
right,
devastated by it, but I took the silver lining route from it.
Yeah. There's a Lars von Trier film, Melancholia, which I think is really an astounding kind of film, which has two sisters as the world is coming to an end. And one is almost cripplingly depressed, and the other is functioning well. In the beginning of the movie, through the first half, it's really an examination of how this sister loves her depressed sister, but can't get through to her. And then the end of the world is happening, and the depressed sister becomes the hero, the one who's holding everybody together. People who were moral support and all of that commit suicide. People who are scientists lose their shit. All this stuff is happening, but she's the one who's like, this is how I felt my whole life. And what I can tell you is I can't fix this, but I can tell you right here, right now is the important thing. Stop thinking about everything else. Right here, right now. This is the thing that's important. And I thought that was such an amazing thing for a film to say. And I think that there are times like this where I don't know why some of us go in this direction, but we do, that we kind of thrive in the element that is so disorienting and discouraging. We're still unhappy, and yet somehow we've learned to fish and swim in this stream. And I think it's because, for some of us at least, in our early years, we spent a lot of time dealing with cataclysm after cataclysm that was other people landing on our lives and causing us all sorts of distress. And we get that coping mechanism. Oh, here we go. Oh, I know what having a load of shit land on my head feels like. Here we go. Let's get ready.
Right. So, Bill, did you want to read Mandy's post?
Yeah, sure. It wasn't really a question, but she said, and I'm not sure what we were talking about. It's been a ways back. She says, I do identify with mainstream women. I love bubblegum pop, Starbucks, and other typical crap, but I love most genres of horror, camp, H.G. Lewis, and everything you're talking about. For me, it's pure entertainment, and I don't have to think. I can't watch anything else. Way too much emotion. She says, I don't want to feel a movie other than my nostalgic roots to these beloved movies. I think that really kind of hits the nail on the head right there. The nostalgia, at least, is that's why I'm such a huge fan of this. I can only speak for myself, but that's why I've been a lifelong horror fan, is because this was the genre that really excited me when I was young, and it got me interested in films. A lot of people talk bad about Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel because they badmouth horror films. But I watched their show religiously, and whether they loved it or hated it, I love that they were talking about it.
Right.
And they taught me how to talk about and appreciate movies.
Yeah.
So you don't have to, everybody's opinion doesn't have to be yours. You can learn from people.
Yeah. Well, I think they were, even though they railed on horror films a lot, and some very famously, right? Because they were some of the guys that said some stuff that was like, this is pure pornography. Look at the boogeyman. Why is this even happening? Why are the clothes being torn off? I mean, and there's some valid questions about some of that. But in reality, they loved movies. They might have been prigs about certain things, but I mean, Roger Ebert wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, right? Yeah. And he was a huge fan of Russ Myers. He worked and played with Russ Meyer. He did love some horror films, and others he did not. He had one of the most glowing things to say about Jodorowsky's Santa Sangre, and I'm quoting it in my book, which is Jodorowsky understands that it is such an honor to make horror films that you must not bore anybody. And I think that that's the thing that you can say about, what Ebert and Siskel did love, was when it was something that was surprising. And I think, one of the reasons that I am the way that I am about horror films is that I loved them as a kid, but I also grew up in that time of Andrew Sarris and Pauline Kael and stuff. I was alive when The Exorcist was up for Best Picture and Jaws was up for Best Picture. There were movies that were constantly getting up there for the Oscars. And so my thought was, when I was growing up, even my dad thought somewhat critically about horror, not horror films, but films in general, because that was the time. The 70s were this time where people felt that movies were going to continue to increase in genius. They were going to continue to be this art form that was going to be so expressive. It was the golden age again. And everybody talked about how movies could change things, and it was true art, not something to be made into matinee stuff. And I was like, well, why can't horror be? And everybody like, oh, kid. And now I think that's kind of changed. I think horror is allowed in because you had critics that were not just the one person who was writing for the New Yorker, Charles Champlin, who really just wanted to be a theater writer, right? He didn't care about movies. But then you have people who came in that were of that monster child era, the people who were hanging out with Bogdanovich and Coppola and stuff, the very pop culture folks, They had a lot of stuff that was from the French New Wave, sure, but they also really were into the pop culture movies. You look at Martin Scorsese, a lot of his stuff is B-movie gangster films and musicals. George Romero loved the musicals. He was big on the
Yeah.
Tales of Hoffman, things like that. It's not like blood, guts, blood, guts. They had this thing that was for pop culture, not high culture. And so because of that, I think, part of why I'm like I am is because critics, even though they were scorning it, they were still looking at it. The thing that was terrible when I was growing up was like the Reading Times, I think was the big newspaper that had a reviewer near where I was. And it would just say, not reviewed by us for horror films. They wouldn't even review them.
Too
That's
often.
the shit. Yeah. That was the shit that bothered me. If you got outraged by a horror movie, for most of us horror fans, that was a rallying cry to go see the thing. And sometimes I realized that they were correct, but other times I was like, man, that was a lot of fun. I think it's funny though that we still feel the need to say, well, it's just fun. I don't want to think. I don't want to feel. So I'm going to watch people get ripped to pieces, right? It's some of the highest versions of emotion possible, a horror film, but we like to say we're doing this not to feel. I think that there is always an artistic expression we're having as well as having fun. It's okay. We can sound a little smart. We don't have to pretend to be dumb about this stuff.
Right.
Nostalgia isn't dumb. Nostalgia has value. Nostalgia allows us to see movies that the next generation is going to create because they want to emulate the thing that so made them happy. And I don't think that it makes it any dumber to just say that I love the movies, but I also hear too many people apologize for thinking that that horror films have a real cool purpose, or they see something in them, or they think that it's talking about something that they're really pissed off about, or whatever it is. There's no reason you can't do that too.
Right.
And it's not like this is a political thing where, well, I'm only on the fun side. I'm the fun side. Oh, I'm the art side. No, the two fucking work together, man. Let's get rid of the or statements. My way or the highway. Screw that. It's and. It can be fun. It is fun, and it can also be socially relevant or really exciting and full of art that's emotional.
And one of the things I wanted to bring up too is that we talked about how horror films themselves can be scary to the audience of their time. So, like we said, when Dracula Frankenstein first came out, those were terrifying to the audiences of that day. Now we kind of aren't so scared by them. But there's also something to be said for when you first saw something. Like when I raised my kids, my son's 21 now. He could talk the talk. He was on the show last episode. He's always, very analytical about these movies, very knowledgeable. My daughter, the same way, she's 18. And, I raised them at a young age and introduced them to stuff that I saw at that age. And now I've got my grandson. He's at that level. He's 5. And I'm showing him all kinds of cool stuff that I saw. I'm waiting, for example, on a movie like Jaws. Because more often than not, in the past decade, Jaws has been re-released almost every summer, at least somewhere around here.
Right.
So I'm waiting to take him to the theater before I show him Jaws. I'm not going to show it to him on TV because I think part of it is the experience of seeing the film. It'll probably terrify him, probably won't because he's seen quite a bit. But I think that that's something that, I did that with my kids when they were little. They re-released Jaws and I took them to see it and they had never seen it on TV before. And it had a lasting impact on them. So I think that for when we see things at certain ages, that also impacts our love or nostalgia for these films.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think everybody that makes stuff kind of says the same thing, whether it be albums or movies, is that between the ages of like 10 and 16 are like the times where whatever it is that you hear, it's like a blueprint for you. And I think it's also, I always talk about, like I talk about in the book, The First Kiss. What's your first kiss with horror? It's like I saw a lot of horror movies before I saw the movie that scared me so much that felt like it was personal. It's almost like it has to be something that is illegal contraband, right? You're not supposed to see that movie. It is the forbidden fruit thing. My dad had me watch Them and The Thing from Another Planet or Another World and all these movies because he knew I was a scaredy cat. I would get nightmares in 10 seconds flat. So he had court-appointed movies. These were the ones that I could watch without any problems. And I ended up seeing an art horror film when I was a kid, Don't Look Now. And I was not supposed to see that. It was an R-rated movie.
That's amazing that he let you watch that one.
Oh, he didn't. I stumbled upon it, right? It was on HBO back when HBO was first being created. It was the Green Channel, I think, in Manhattan. But they started branching out. So they had satellite areas that were testing it. And it just so happened the Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, Hazleton area of Pennsylvania was one of the test areas. It was equidistant from Philadelphia and New York City, just pure luck of the draw that we had it in the early days when it was like only 8 hours and the rest of it was just a crawl of what was going to be on the schedule and like Steely Dan music in the background and things. That was all that there was. And I would sit and watch that crawl. But the idea of watching a movie unedited was forbidden fruit in its own way. I mean, you saw all these movies edited for television where you had to go to the theater. And so I remember seeing like The Stone Killer and stuff, super violent, crazy movies. And at least for that time, they were super violent. But I ended up stumbling upon Don't Look Now. And it fried my brain because it didn't look like any other horror film I had seen up to that time. Most of the horror movies I had seen were black and white. They had that big wide shot, establishing shot that was used most of the time. Camera was on sticks. Lighting was perfect. And then I'm watching this movie and it's shaky camera. It's being handheld in certain spots. There's non-linear editing. So time is all over the place. There's symbolism. And then there's a horrible drowning death. And I mean, it's like, holy shit. And then there's a huge sex scene later on. All this stuff that's just
huge.
Yeah. Just a few completely fried my young brain. And that was the one that told me, I need to watch more of these things. It did. It gave me nightmares, but I couldn't tell anybody because I'd be in so much trouble for seeing it. And I think that there's something too when you see these things. I remember seeing Jaws in the theater when it first came out. And before you used to get pre-scared, right? The last time I was like, well, not last time, but one of the many times I got pre-scared was like Paranormal Activity, where I heard all this stuff about it, just little whispers. But there used to be these things like Jaws. Watch out for the tooth, man. You got to not look when he's pulling the tooth out of the ship. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? All these arcane things. You'd be scared. The Exorcist. You heard all about the Exorcist. People were wearing crucifixes in the line waiting to go see it. So it was the idea of it. We talk about the importance of nostalgia, but there's also this thing of the power of like the totem itself. When I was trying to find Snuff, the movie Snuff came out in 1976. Now, of course, it's an old B movie called Slaughter with an extra scene at the end, and it became Snuff. But I heard all about it, right? This could be real. Michael J. Weldon made me think about it because he wrote this article in Rolling Stone called Night Creatures, where he went to Times Square at midnight to watch horror movies, and Snuff was there. And so I heard all about this. Was it real? The totem of that was so much heavier than the reality of the movie. The reputation was dark. So when I finally did find it in a video store, when I picked it up, it felt heavier than any other VHS tape that was there. It's like, man, there's like real evil in this, isn't there? And so we get that way about these things. It has a level of importance to it, the thrill that goes there. And I think that happens because every time it is like a first kiss. We always we're chasing that first kiss for the rest of our lives, man. We get that one, we love it. It might be awkward and embarrassing, but you know what? It was pretty fun. So when I got scared as a kid and it was a life-changing event, I've been chasing that dragon for a long, long time. And what do we all love? The moment we're surprised, the moment we're watching a movie and we go, man, that creeped me out. I'm so happy. It's like I was actually shocked.
That's awesome, dude. So we're coming up on an hour and a half here. I think we should probably start wrapping it up. Um, first of all, I wanted to say, Scott, I had a few other things I wanted to talk about, so I think we're gonna have to have you on again a few times at least, because I wanted to talk about horror books that we grew up with.
Oh boy,
I had some
yeah.
props I was going to use. Well, like this one, for example, is
Oh, there we go.
the
Yes,
Oh
ET
yeah.
movies.
one of the Magna Cartas
Yeah,
of
yeah.
our.
I
And
had that one.
Yeah,
oh yeah, I think we all did.
yeah.
Um,
Especially if you had a library card, you'd see
right.
these things and go, oh, and then you have to buy them. I used to buy them at Walden Books back when they
Yeah.
were new and no one gave a shit. Right now, try to get that book. That book probably cost you like $30, didn't it?
No, it's mine from when I was a kid.
Oh wow, you kept it.
Yeah, I have all my books. Actually, all right, I'll bring up another quick one because this one I love, and you can still find it online. I don't know how cheap it is. It's called "How to Care for Your Monster,"
Oh, I
and it's
remember
by
that one.
Nelson Bridwell, who wrote the Clifford books. And it's really funny. I didn't actually get to scan any images in, but let me see if I can find a good one to show you. Like the guy bringing his werewolf to the doctor or to the vet, and there's all kinds of
Oh,
things. And there's a sequel book to it called Monster Holidays, and it's like what to do with your monsters on the holidays and stuff. And the other topic I want to talk about at some point, no, obviously not today, but toys. I've got this awesome Creature from the Black Lagoon guy. This I did pick up recently. Wasn't that expensive though. I forget where I got it.
Boy,
Um,
I
but
could
they're
go on
still
about
making
that.
awesome toys. I mean,
Well,
look at
they're making more now. I
yeah.
mean, the
I mean,
stuff
look at this
now is
thing.
incredible.
Look at this thing. It's Jason Voorhees from Part 6. I don't know if the light is doing
Yeah.
it justice, but it's amazing. This is from NECA, and they're putting out unbelievable stuff. I think they have like one for each, almost
Yeah.
every
E-
Jason movie.
every convention I go to, there's one toy distributor somewhere that I go in and I go, oh my God. And then there's guys that have you ever seen Barry the Clay Guy? He
No.
shows up on the East Coast a lot. Barry makes clay sculptures of characters like Dr. Fives and American Mary, and he goes all over. He did the vivisected woman from Terrifier, but he goes all the way back to the Hunchback and things, and they're fun. They look like you know exactly who they are. And what he tends to do is he goes to the conventions and whoever is there. Like he was there when Barbara Steele was still going around. And so he made her Black Sabbath face, and gave that to her for free. And so that's his creative thing. But all these things, he sells them. And you will see a line of guys like me, people who, we know better, but we don't know better. We're sitting there ready to plunk down $40 because we look and we go, he did Kolchak the Night Stalker with a crucifix as photorealistic from when I saw it in Starlog magazine all those years ago. All of that wonderful stuff is there. And toys, when we were growing up, it was more like the Aurora kits, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah,
And the
that,
figures.
yeah, those were like the big pieces, and so many. The thing that was really big was Godzilla. For a while there, Godzilla, the
Yep.
multiple versions of the models that were for that, and the Universal creatures mostly. But I mean, you can find things now. I laugh at some of them. Somebody had the Fog, and literally it was just cotton floss
yeah.
in a bubble packet, and I was like, that's funny, but it's also so right for the fandom, right? Because having that tongue-in-cheek thing, you have to know what the Fog is before that's a funny joke. And it's a
Right.
funny enough joke to plunk down $10, to be able to show somebody who's also a fan. And I think the toys have definitely just gone up, up, up. Sure, I think you can say Galoob with Star Wars was probably the beginning of it all, where it became mass marketed in a way that they went, well, maybe we could do this and this and this. But I'm stunned at some of the things that I see that are super like a basket case, things like that, where you're like, what? Or Frankenhooker, you're like, really? An Elmer? You can get an Elmer? This is insane. So I think that we're in kind of a really cool place with toys, and the idea that we just started to say fuck it, it's okay. There was a time when it was shameful, right? You had to be like a mouth breather, just sitting there, hugging your GI Joe doll, and people were like, what the heck. Now it's not only collector stuff, but it's people. I love that there's so many of my friends that make models and paint them, or you can get them painted or you can paint them yourself. I paint them myself. That's what you'll hear. And it's like a level of pride to going down that path. And I think that that's a cool path, and something that we're letting our freak flags fly a little bit more about this stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. Bill, do you have any quick memories of toys?
Oh wow. I mean, there were so many. There was a lot of stuff. I was lucky enough to grow up in the 70s, and that was when they really started to cash in on this. It probably before that is like how Scott said, it was a little shameful if you were a kid and you were into horror movies. But in the 70s, it started to loosen up a little bit, and there was a lot of stuff out there. Like, I never got into the model kits, but I was obsessed with those things that you would get in the back of a comic book. Like you would send away, and it was like,
electronic ghost,
monster ghost. Yeah.
Yep.
Control it by remote control, which was a string tied to the balloon that was the monster ghost. So, whatever. But I loved that kind of stuff. I remember one time somebody brought home for me paint by numbers of monsters, and one of them was the Mummy, and I wish I still had it. I don't know what happened to it, but of course it was a paint by number, so that's how I did such a good job at age 10. But some of it was glow in the dark paint too, and it would glow at night. I remember
it. And they had the black velvet ones where you would paint and had black velvet or in the shadows and stuff. Okay, my friend, that made me pour another cup of coffee because there's some shit that's got to get talked about on that. But because I'm thinking about not only the models and things. First off, the idea of shamefulness, and there's a certain level of like, it's almost like coming out in some ways, dealing with being a horror fan, bring that up. Because my dad, I wanted a GI Joe doll so bad. There's nothing more macho than a GI Joe doll, right? I was like, it's an action figure, Dad. He's like, it's a doll. You're not gonna play with no doll.
Yeah.
Like, but no, and it took everything. It ended up being, I got the space station version of GI Joe, because that was like science and military, and he was okay with that for some reason, or he let me have it. And it was like so much shame. My dad was like, you've got to be kidding me. And so when I started getting the models, it was actually easier for like Creature of the Black Lagoon, because that's a monster, right? That's completely out there. And Godzilla, I had the glow in the dark Godzilla. I made the model, and some of the scales glowed in the dark, so I would put it under my lamp and then lay in bed going, ooh, looking at the things. But the other monster stuff that was there, toys that were insane. I was just talking about this weekend with somebody. The Strange Change Machine. Does anybody remember the Strange Change Machine?
Yep. That was a classic.
The cast iron hot plate that you give 10-year-olds that has molded plastic figures squashed into a cube, and you put it on the hot plate, and the arm goes boing, 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 boing as it starts to heat up. But you're basically playing with electricity and hot plates and burning your finger on plastic. And then there's a vice grip made out of die cast metal that you're like able to crush your fingers in. And you're pushing this all together, and God knows what toxic gases are given out. But it was like, my favorite thing was the Strange Change Machine by Mattel.
There was also something in the 70s that was, this just came up in conversation for me a couple days ago. Do you remember the Shrunken Heads kit?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
And Vincent Price was on the box.
Yep.
Yeah.
They were so gruesome. And what it was an apple. Right. You would get an apple and put it in this plastic chamber and attach the plastic chamber to a light bulb. And you would leave it on the light bulb for like 2 days. And that was the part I didn't like, because I was like, you gotta wait 2 days for this? But once it was all shrunken and everything, like you could carve it so that it looked like a human face, and they had beads that you would put in it for eyeballs and white beads for teeth and this like stringy hair. It was so gruesome. I loved it.
Oh yeah, they had
I-
the creepy crawlers as well, where you would
Yep.
get all
Yeah.
these little
Yep.
pieces of like liquid rubber, I guess, and you put it
Yeah.
inside of the tray and turn it into scorpions and things. I
Also,
love that
probably
stuff.
not very healthy for children.
No, that and super elastic bubble plastic.
I was gonna say that, but speaking of Vincent Price, I still have. In fact, I think I have two, but I must have bought in my adult years. But I begged my parents to get me the game Hangman because Vincent Price was on.
Yes, I remember the commercials for that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, those are still on YouTube. You can find those.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So yeah, there's so much that was being done. I think really, if we go back to it, we owe so much to Forey Ackerman and Famous
Yes.
Monsters, because that legitimizes, even in the weirdest way, legitimizes fandom, but also the idea that we could talk to each other and find fans and start doing that. Once again, the DIY thing that I talked about before. How many of us wrote somebody else? Or first you write the letter to the editor and you sit there and go, I cannot believe what you said about Phantasm. That makes absolutely no sense to me. Here's what I saw. And then you would go to the back and there'd be like somebody making a board game. And you would write that person and they would send you a deck of cards and shit. Or you would have people starting to trade movies, and once the VHS came out. But there was so much of that kind of thing. I remember in Starlog magazine, these board games that had these really weird, I mean, they were still more Dungeons and Dragons or science fictiony, but it was still this whole thing of, you knew that there were people just like you out there and they spoke the language. And I think Forey Ackerman as a collector legitimized toys. He legitimized having that kind of thing. We all wanted Dracula's ring, right? We all wanted to have the George Powell's time machine in our backyard, be Bob Burns and have this stuff. And I think when we go down that path, we can't do that, but we can buy the toy that is based on it. I remember when Planet of the Apes came out, and they would sell a Planet of the Apes makeup kit in the back of Starlog, and you'd be like, you go, wow, that's amazing. It's going to look great. Well, it's not going to look great, but you can get it if you so wish. And I mean, Dick Miller used to, or not Dick Miller,
Dick Smith.
Dick Smith, thank you.
Right,
Dick Miller's the actor. Dick Smith, I mean, he had that photocopied thing of his film school, and
I had his makeup kit. He had a horror makeup kit.
Yes.
It had like great stuff again a child should not have. It was liquid latex,
right,
which gets everywhere if you don't use it right. But
yeah.
But I did stuff like that, and I made these really gruesome. It had like bullet holes and knife wounds and everything. And my mother almost had a heart attack.
Yeah,
I still have his book on makeup.
Yeah, that's. I was just going to talk about that because the film or the special effects guys that came after him used to call him up and say, Dick, what's your thing for blood? It's like, what do you want? What do you want? I'm in the middle of something. Okay, hold on. You have a fax machine? He'd fax. He'd go into his filing cabinet. He'd fax what his blood recipe was to whoever was doing that. And a lot of that happened was because he started in television and he did TV makeup. And at that point, Hollywood films had their nose straight up in the air over television. So he was working for David L. Wolper, who did these sports things and everything. And so he did makeup for, I think, Requiem for a Heavyweight. And at that point, Wolper said, "Hey, I'm going to Hollywood. Would you like to come along?" He's like, "Yes, I would love to work on a Hollywood film." And so they were going to do a film version of the TV movie that they did, and he was shut out. He said all of the people who were in film were like, "Go screw yourself." And so he came back to the East Coast, and then he got lucky. He ended up getting a call. I think it was for The Godfather, or no, it was The Exorcist. Was it The Godfather or The Exorcist? No, I think it might have been The Godfather.
The Exorcist. Yeah,
he also worked on The Godfather. He did the bullet hole in Sterling Hayden and the shot in the throat. I think he also did the makeup for Brando to age him.
Yeah.
Yeah. yeah, there's some really interesting things about Dick Smith. So he knew what it was like to be ostracized in the industry. So when he made it, even if he was grumpy, he still spent a lot of his time helping out the guys who came behind him. And I think that was one of the cool things about him. He was heartbreaking when he got his Oscar in his old age, and he got up and he was like, not, he felt unworthy of it. And it's like, Dick, come on, you like revolutionized everything. You changed it all.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's start wrapping it up here. And Scott, first of all, I just want to say it was so glad to have you on our
Thank you. This is
first
fun.
live stream. You definitely got to come back.
Please.
Thanks. I'm glad it was fun for everybody.
Oh, it was. I'm going to put together a list of dates and topics, and if you're available, you want to jump in on any of them, you're absolutely more than welcome. Where can our viewers find you online? And can you touch upon, you briefly mentioned it earlier, you've got a second book coming out too.
Yes. Okay. So you can find me in all the places that you normally would think. I have a website, hellbentforhorror.com. Take a look there. You'll be able to find my book and also books that I recommend. There's a lot of really great horror books, both fiction and nonfiction, that I talk about. If you're looking for me on Facebook, it's Hellbent for Horror. Same with Instagram, I'm on there. And on Twitter, it's Hellbent Horror. Weirdly enough, when I was going for Hellbent for Horror, that was already taken. And I had to change it to Hellbent Horror. And I still can't find Hellbent for Horror, so I don't know what I ended up having with that. Anyway, off the subject on that. You can find me in those spots if you're looking for the book, really, if you just go to Amazon or any of those. But also on my website, I like to help out the small businessmen, the bookstores that are out there. So I have the ISBN number written there. And if you take that and you go to whatever place it's nearby and you give them that number, they will be more than happy to get you that book. And then you're helping the small businessman that's out there, and you're not, paying for another billionaire spaceship. Not saying that you can't have another billionaire spaceship if you want, but if you're one of the folks that decides not to do that. So the second book is untitled as of now. I'm in the midst of the pain and blood of putting it together, but it really is a discussion on where we are with horror now. How do we keep the next generation of horror movies really fun and surprising and DIY, and also basically saying, horror never deserved your shame, but at this point, really, we don't even thanks, but we don't really need to be part of your club anymore. And why we think that horror has all this interesting stuff. I'm talking about things like how the most important thing that can happen with horror has been happening for a while, and that's the idea of how we are now becoming more gender fluid, and we're more away from the binary and multiple things. I think genre fluid is another thing that we should be. And I think that we've been that way for a while, but some of the best horror films that are out there, horror is like Frank's Red Hot sauce, right? It goes on everything, makes it all better. And I think that the best horror movies take from other areas and allow people to observe the horror that's in these other genres. It really mixes well. And so I'm going to be talking about that kind of stuff inside of the book, and as well as what I think. I don't believe that there's a good and bad. I don't use those terms, but I do talk about how to keep movies from being boring, and things that you can see in horror movies that I think make them just a little bit more fun to watch. Things that take the movie and go, all right, if I see a movie try this kind of thing, I know they're really on their way to giving me something really great. And also the idea of loving a turkey for those reasons. That idea of wabi sabi, sitting there saying, hey, if it has a crack, we cover it with glue or with gold, the same way the Japanese do. You break a pot, gold seal. So I think our horror movies are that.
Awesome. Awesome. And Bill, before I ask you to give out your contact info, I want to rectify. Last week, we talked about your driving a silent fanzine, but we really didn't illustrate it for the audience. So I just wanted you to show the audience what one looks like on the cover. I think I just sort of held one up in front of the camera. And where did Bill go?
Sorry, I walked away to get one.
Oh, I got one right here on the thing, but you could show us too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's great.
And then let's just show them real quick the
I'm
inside.
gonna need to get these because
Yeah, this is a
I-
really special issue for us because we got a lot of Tony Lawrence was on my short list of folks I had to get for the zine, and of course she's up there with Michael Berryman, who is more well known and
Yeah.
more well respected.
Well,
but
I'm looking at the David Hess. I'm like
I-
going, wow. Yeah.
But I was so excited that Tony, I was more excited to get Tony than Michael Berryman. Not that I
Right.
wasn't thrilled about Michael Berryman, but like Tony, like I didn't know where to find her, but we got in touch with social media and there she was. And David Hess, yes, also legendary. This is an original interview with David Hess that he did. He was on a podcast that a friend of mine did, and the podcast never actually was broadcast, so it
really?
was made available. So we condensed it into an interview format.
Oh, well, that's great. That I definitely want to hear about or read. I don't know, but if you listen to my podcast, I talk about a lot of the things that we've talked about. I love this broad genre and talking about like makeup. I had a whole thing about makeup artists, a whole thing about books that we grew up with, but also zines and how important zines are, and that it's some stalwarts such as yourself and Dave Kasanke in Wisconsin doing liquid cheese, these ones that are long standing. A friend of mine, John Kitley's Crypt, that's an online one, but he's been writing for Evil Speak magazine and Horror Hound for quite a while. There's something, so I love seeing what you have because that's the old photocopied stapled thing that I remember. Where it cannot wreak more of fandom if it tried, right?
That's all it is. I mean, we don't have a corporate sponsor, and we're just sort of,
that's mine.
This is what turns us on.
Yeah,
so.
I just more than that too, because Bill puts in a lot of work to get these old newspaper ads, which is a lost art, and I think we've all kind of talked about that before. That and this is just one page that I just scanned in, Bill. I don't know if you want to show any more, but there's just some amazing things. I mean, I look through these newspaper ads myself, and I do a lot of research on it. And my parents always took me to horror movies. My family loved horror, so I had none of that shame going on. But I would look at a newspaper recently, and I'd be like, wait a minute, I saw that. Why didn't I see that? Why didn't my parents take me to that?
It's that was what got me interested in horror. Part of what got me interested in horror, and it fueled the fire, I should say, was seeing these ads in the newspaper. And you would look in there, and there would be like these really bizarre looking, strange items, and you didn't.
I did searches for that kind of thing for an article I did about Texas Chainsaw, because when I was a kid. In Pennsylvania, where I was, there were 5 different drive-ins when I was growing up. And there was one, I think it was the Motor View or the Hazelton Drive-In, that was over a major interstate. And they had Texas Chainsaw. And in the ad, it was like the person supposedly hanging, but they had
Terry
it
McMinn,
sideways. Terry McMinn, but they had it angled sideways with a chainsaw above it with Texas Chainsaw written. And my dad's like, there's no way in fucking hell we'll ever see that movie. and I'm like, I've got to see this thing. And how are they going to show that when you've got like, there's going to be car accidents? How's it going to happen? People are going to see the screen. And I told people about that ad, and they're like, I don't know if I've ever seen that. And what it was, and of course you folks know this, where you used to have the press kits who worked at a movie theater, and they would have, if this movie makes it to the 3rd amazing week, here's the held over stuff, and here's the little pictures, and here's the big one, and all that really cheesy stuff that was being done. And I love that stuff. It's an art form because it emotionally connected with us, and once again, an element of surprise and shock, allure. But when they were making it was just ad guys going, man, I need another martini if I have to do one more of these horror movie things. What am I going to do? And yet, it's wonderful. I need to find out about some cool things that are happening in Pittsburgh, because I'm going to be in Pittsburgh for it's called Confluence, and it's a book, horror and sci-fi book convention.
Ooh.
that's out by the airport, and I'll be there in July 28th to the 31st for Confluence. I'm going to be a panelist there, and I'm going to be in Denver. I have a couple places that I'm going to be over the next couple of months, but I'm looking forward to going back to Pennsylvania on that side. I haven't been to Pittsburgh in a while, and I know that now there's the George Romero Museum. I want to
Yep.
be able to see that. That didn't exist when I was back there. And I hope to go down a few memory lanes. I know Monroeville Mall doesn't look anything like it, but I also put some money into saving the chapel when
Oh, wow.
Oh, awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, when the wife and I went last year, we went and we saw we went to the cemetery. We watched the movie the night before and took still shots so that we could make sure that we took the right photos in the graveyard. And we saw the chapel, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. It was one of those things I said, well, I can plop a little bit of money down on this. If I gave Jim Van Beber money for Gator Green, I can give money for this one.
Oh man, well that's awesome. So Bill, how can people find you and your magazine and your show online?
Oh, I'm on Facebook, Insta, Twitter as Groovy Doom. My most active page is the Facebook Groovy Doom page, and you can also, if you want to purchase Drive-In Asylum, if you happen to be in the New York area, we're carried by Forbidden Planet. If you're in the UK, you can buy it through Strange Vice UK. And but what I really hope you'll do is go to our Etsy shop and buy it directly from me. The Etsy shop is called Groovy Doom, and I have most of the back issues from like issue number 8 onwards are available for sale. We're about to do, well, the last quarterly issue we did was number 23, and we're about to do our 6th special, which is dedicated to films from 1981. It's the 1981 yearbook. It's stellar age for horror films. And
Yeah,
all about
81.
81.
Yep,
Yeah.
81, 82, 83. But I would, yeah, I talk about that a lot because in my first book, I said I didn't like slashers just to get people pissed off because a lot of them were super ass boring. But the first 3 years, 80, there are a few in there, 80, 81, and 82 were just these amazingly brutal, crazy. The rules hadn't been made yet. The template hadn't been smoothed out. Anything could happen in those movies. And in 81 and 82, you still had the supernatural films that were happening. You had
Yep.
the old style horror films, and then you had these slasher films coming in. There was a wonderful mixture that I think these days there's so many different mixtures and so many places to go. So I think we're kind of in that kind of spot, but 81, 82 really hold a special place.
Right. And werewolf movies, don't forget the werewolf movies in 81.
Oh yeah. Oh my
81,
God. Yeah, 81. And Wolfen. Now that would be something I was
Yeah.
going to actually see if I could raise a stir if anybody saw The Cursed and get into a debate that I don't want to take credit for. But a friend of mine, is it a werewolf movie or not? And it's a really interesting discussion after watching the movie The Cursed. So
Is that the one with Joshua Jackson?
it's the one with the teeth, silver teeth that are part of a gypsy curse, a Romany curse.
Oh, I don't know if I saw that
It's
one.
a new film. It just
Oh,
came out within the
Oh,
last
okay.
6 months.
Okay.
And it's kind of a folk horror thing. But I was just at a horror convention where it was a major hot debate whether that was actually a werewolf movie or not. Something only horror nerds would get into. But
Oh.
but it's such a good movie, and it's such a really good debate because is the wolf in a werewolf movie, right? Is wolf in a werewolf movie? Is that your
Yeah, it's more of a
traditional idea?
Skinwalker movie, but
Right. Yeah. So, but is it considered a werewolf movie? So, I mean, there's wonderful debate about that. And what do we consider canon, and how, is Near Dark a vampire film? I think it is.
oh yeah,
But
absolutely.
but yet it doesn't follow all of the rules of vampire movies, and they never call themselves vampires. Never see a fang. There's no transformation into anything. They have reflections. All these different things. So I love how it's really how much we appreciate the artistry and the surprise, whether or not we will buy into whether you can fuck with the canon or not.
Right. Okay, folks, and I can be found at havenpodcasts.com. If you want to give us your feedback, either, comment below this video. You can still comment on it even after it's been posted and we're done being live, either here on Facebook or YouTube, or you can email us at havenpodcasts@gmail.com because I haven't set up an email for this. I have too many right now. Also, if you want to be a guest on the show and join us to discuss horror in depth, or maybe you have a particular topic you'd like to come on and talk about, please private message us here at Facebook, the Fright Lounge page, and or you can email us at havenpodcasts@gmail.com. So thank you for joining us, and join us again for our next episode of the Fright Lounge. We'll let you know when it's going to be. It should hopefully be the first Sunday of every month, like I said, at 8 p.m., but schedules depending, that could change. But we'll keep everyone posted. And that's it. I'm going to roll the outro, and we're going to go from there.
Okay. Have a good night.
Thank you.